most crimes end with an arrest, with a trial, with a sentence. The Zodiac case did none of those things. Instead, it lingered, quietly influencing law enforcement long after the letters stopped and the headlines faded. Even as new crimes emerged, new killers appeared, and new technologies reshaped investigations, the Zodiac remained a reference point. Not as a success, but as a warning. In the 1960s, American policing operated on assumptions that now seem dangerously fragile. Crimes were local. Killers were impulsive. Communication was slow but manageable. The public trusted institutions almost by default. There was no expectation that a criminal would cross jurisdictions deliberately, manipulate the press, weaponize anonymity, or turn the investigation itself into a stage. The Zodiac shattered those assumptions. He didn't just commit crimes. He attacked the process. One of the Zodiac's most lasting impacts came from what didn't work. The lack of coordination between police departments was impossible to ignore. Reports weren't shared. Suspects weren't cross-checked. Evidence stayed siloed. After the Zodiac, and similar cases that followed, law enforcement began rethinking jurisdictional boundaries. Task forces became more common. Interagency databases slowly emerged. Information-sharing protocols were developed, not because they were ideal, but because failure demanded them. The Zodiac didn't inspire progress. He forced it. Before the Zodiac, criminal profiling was more intuition than discipline. Investigators relied on experience, gut feeling, and stereotypes. There was no standardized behavioral analysis unit and no formal offender typologies. The Zodiac's contradictions, organized yet sloppy, confident yet inconsistent, confounded traditional thinking. He didn't fit the mold. That confusion contributed to the rise of behavioral science in policing. Not to glorify criminals, but to understand patterns beyond surface logic. The question shifted from who looks guilty to who behaves consistently. It was a slow, painful evolution, but one rooted in failure. The Zodiac forced law enforcement and media into an uneasy partnership. Police needed the public. The public needed information. The media needed content. But every Zodiac letter raised the same dilemma. Publish and risk encouraging him. Ignore and risk public backlash? There was no winning move. Eventually, departments began developing media strategies, limiting what details were released, coordinating messaging across agencies, avoiding publication of unverified threats. Not because it stopped criminals, but because uncontrolled exposure clearly made things worse. The Zodiac proved that attention could be just as dangerous as neglect. Before the Zodiac, fear was considered a reaction. After him, it became a factor. Communities altered behavior en masse. Parents changed routines. Schools increased security. Cities adapted to an invisible threat. Police began factoring public psychology into investigations. How panic spreads. How rumors distort memory. How fear pressures institutions into mistakes. The Zodiac didn't just kill people. He changed how people lived. And that impact couldn't be ignored. Here's the irony no one planned for. The Zodiac was one of the first killers to understand narrative. Decades later, that narrative became an industry. Books, documentaries, podcasts, YouTube channels. True crime grew, not because people admired killers, but because they sought understanding, warning, and closure. But the Zodiac case also exposed the danger of storytelling without responsibility. When mystery becomes entertainment, victims fade, speculation replaces evidence, and certainty becomes optional. Modern true crime exists in the shadow of this case, constantly balancing education against exploitation. The Zodiac didn't create true crime culture, but he shaped its ethics. The frustration surrounding the Zodiac helped legitimize something radical at the time. The idea that unsolved cases deserved permanent attention. Cold case units emerged not just from technological optimism, but from moral pressure. The argument was simple. Time should not excuse failure. Families should not be forgotten. Justice should not expire. The Zodiac case became a benchmark. If this couldn't be solved, then something in the system needed to change. And slowly it did. Modern policing often frames technology as salvation. DNA, genealogy, digital records, surveillance. But the Zodiac case remains stubbornly resistant. Not because technology failed, but because it arrived too late. Evidence degraded. Samples were contaminated. Records were incomplete. The lesson was painful but necessary. Technology cannot fix what negligence destroyed. That realization reshaped evidence handling, preservation standards, and forensic accountability. The Zodiac didn't benefit from progress. Future victims might. The case left behind hard-earned truths. Not all crimes want to be solved. Not all killers seek capture. Not all evidence survives. And not all failures are intentional. Policing became more cautious, more methodical, less confident in easy answers. Because confidence, the Zodiac proved, can be fatal. So what did the Zodiac ultimately change? He changed how police communicate, how evidence is preserved, how fear is managed, how stories are told, how failure is studied. But he never faced consequences. And that contradiction sits at the heart of his legacy. Progress built on loss. Knowledge gained through absence. Systems improved without accountability. It's not a satisfying ending. It's a realistic one. The Zodiac Killer may never be named. But he doesn't need to be remembered. What needs remembering are the people who forced institutions to evolve, without ever receiving justice in return. The victims. The families. The communities who lived in fear. The Zodiac wanted immortality. Instead, his greatest impact was accidental. He made it harder for the next person like him to succeed. And that may be the only justice this case will ever offer.